This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 250, DrupalSpoons.
Do-do-do-do. Yay!
Welcome to Talking Drupal. On today's show, we learn about DrupalSpoons from Moshe Weitzman. Moshe was the first American to contribute to Drupal, if you can believe it. He joined Drupal in 2001 and has been a consistent technical and organizational leader ever since. Moshe maintains the user, comment, and bootstrap subsystems in Drupal's CLI tool, Drush. He was the lead architect on several major Drupal 8 rollouts, and while at Aqua, he led several Drupal 8 innovations, including adding responsive design to Drupal's end user and admin experiences. He added the RESTful web services. He added the upgraded path and vastly improved performance. Welcome, Moshe.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I was going to say, is it appropriate for us to say welcome back?
Yeah, maybe.
So we recorded this episode a week and a half ago and then had some technical difficulties. So that episode only recorded the first 20 minutes. So we figured we would really love to have Moshe back so you guys could hear the entire 60 minutes instead of just the first third. So thank you for your flexibility.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem. Hopefully I can be even, tighter in my answers this time.
Yeah, we gave you a dry run, so most people don't get that.
It's true. I appreciate it.
Joining us this week, as usual, is Steven. What's new with you?
Let's see what's new with me since the first time we recorded this episode. Last time I talked about a utility that I am using now, and I'm a week further into using it. So it's an app called SyncThing, and it is an open source utility that works like Dropbox does for comparison, but it's a peer-to-peer app, and it's not an outside service. So basically you set it up on your own computers and it will pretty straightforward and easily sync folders between those computers. I'm still in test mode with it. I maybe have 4 or 5 folders and I'm syncing between multiple computers. I think I'm on 4 devices, 3 computers, and a phone right now. And for 2 weeks, it's been working flawlessly. So John asked the question last time, why would you do that instead of Dropbox? So why would I do this instead of Dropbox? So Dropbox is an outside service. I pay them, which is a reasonable fee. They've worked great for me for years, but they do have my content. And I'm paying someone to keep my content there when I can really do it myself. And if I have multiple devices and multiple computers, it's just like Dropbox in terms of if you consider them a backup service. A few other things about Dropbox, and one of the things that I first started to look at this for is that they have not been super friendly with Linux users in the past. About a year and a half ago, they basically said they weren't going to support all the Linux file systems any longer. Basically, you had to be on extension 4 file system, which is like a basic Linux, probably the most popular file system. But if you were using anything else like ButterFS or anything like that, you were going to be out of luck and could not use Dropbox any longer. They kind of went back on that a little bit 6 months later, but still they do not fully support Linux. So as a Linux user, Dropbox at any point in time or any proprietary tool could just stop supporting that platform and you're stuck. So I'm hoping SyncThing will work for me for eventually stop using an outside service for that kind of feature.
Something I see SyncThing used a lot with too is in the Home Assistant community. So our avid listeners know that I'm a big proponent of Home Assistant. It's an open source home automation platform. A lot of people in that community use SyncThing so that they can have the configuration on their computer, and then it syncs to whatever server they're using to actually run Home Assistant. So instead of having to move files or use Git to move stuff between servers, SyncThing just updates the configuration as soon as they change it. Personally, I use a VS Code in Docker, so I can just update the code directly on the server. But I looked at SyncThing for a little while for the same reason. What's new with you this week, John?
So unlike Steven, I actually changed mine because we launched people into space, and that was interesting to me. However, recently I saw an article about SpaceX actually using Linux on the rocket they used to send people into space. And I know there are a few Linux listeners on the crew here, as well as probably in the audience. So I thought that was really interesting. And if you haven't found that, or if you haven't heard about that, you can search Google and find the article. And I'll try to put the article in the show notes if I come across it again.
Linux has been running our space program for years and years. As well as...
this isn't... Hold on. This isn't new news?
No, this isn't new news.
Oh. Well, all right. Then I guess I should take a more active interest in the operating system of choice from NASA. But
Okay.
subsequently, SpaceX actually is using Linux. So I don't know. I don't know if that makes a difference or if that's new and exciting. But
I think Elon Musk has said any of the things I'm involved with have to run Linux. That's a joke. Because it also powers, I assume it also powers, and I think it does also power vehicles that are under his umbrella.
I'll add that Tesla.com, at least until recently, was a Drupal site.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if that's still the case. I think they may have changed, but that was very quietly
that's a negative. It is still a Drupal site.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And it's running Drupal 8, so that's good. They hopefully will be running Drupal 9 at some point in the near future.
Yeah, they haven't updated Drupal 9 yet.
And that Drupal site is powered by Linux, I'm sure. So there we go.
Wow. And we've come full circle.
That's right.
Speaking of coming full circle, Nick, what's going on with you?
For me, I'll stick with the same story so that our listeners don't miss out. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I spent some time in the front yard doing some gardening. We planted some trumpet vines, and we had some posts that we put in essentially a half barrel full of concrete. So hopefully they'll crawl up that. And when we planted them, they were essentially sticks. And it's amazing to me how quickly these things are taking root. I mean, it's been a week and a half, and they're already like a couple of them have grown like, I don't know, 5-6 inches, and there are hundreds of leaves. I mean, I'm kind of concerned that it's going to take over my front yard now. So I was a little worried that they would just kind of wither and die, but I think I'm going to have the opposite battle year in and year out now. But we're looking forward to it. Supposedly they attract hummingbirds, and looking forward to having some more wildlife. So excited about that. And since you're a recurring guest now, Moshe, what's new with you this week?
Funny. Let's see. Drupal stuff I've worked on. I worked on some improvements to our implementation of Backstop at mass.gov, where I do some consulting.
Nice.
Backstop is like image regression tool. So it takes snapshots of your production website and the website that you are about to deploy, and does visual regression testing on it, and reports pages and sections of the page that have changed, at which point the operator of the test can accept the change or flag it as a problem, and then we have to go and fix whatever we've broken. So that's a pretty cool tool, and we're using it now post-release as a sanity check to make sure that we didn't break anything. We had an instance recently where we did a deployment, and there was some kind of race condition that happened such that the aggregated CSS file either didn't generate or had 0 bytes or something like that on the shared file system. And so all the pages looked terrible, right? With no CSS, Drupal looks especially wrong. So we're hoping that this backstop after we deploy would catch that. And it didn't happen on all pages, so our quick smoke test didn't find a page that was broken.
Steven, are you still using Backstop?
Yeah, I am. So I had some questions. Are you using that as a like a cron job that's going to run for you regularly now, or is it only tied to your deployment process?
It is not a cron job. It's tied to the post deployment.
Okay.
It's also used like as a CI tool. So we deploy to our continuous environment every day or every night, and then we run Backstop there. So there are a few points in the cycle where we run it, but not like every 2 hours or anything.
And does it, for your continuous deployment or integration process, does it stop the deployment based on error message coming back from it, or is it just sort of an info? Hey, this is what happened during the deployment.
It does not stop the deployment because there's lots of times when the content changes and something changes and it's legitimate. So it is a little bit annoying that you have to go look at it a lot, but it's still a useful tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the cool things about it is for example, if you have a block on a page that returns ads, and so those ads are going to change in every page load, you can actually tell it to ignore certain divs. So for things like that will change and aren't a problem, you can have it just ignore them and not report out. And there's also, I forget the term for this, but they also have this slider. So they'll show the original image and the broken image, and you can slide it back and forth so you can kind of see
what's different.
Yeah. What exactly is shifting. Because you're right. Sometimes it's as simple as the text shifts by a pixel, and then it shows, okay, everything has changed because all the text is a pixel off. And that's not a. Do you have a question?
No, keep going.
No, my hand was at my head. Yeah.
No, I meant John. I thought he was saying something. So that's obviously not a breaking change and something that should generally stop a deployment, but it will show a lot of like, hey, this page is entirely changed, and it really hasn't.
So I was just going to say it's becoming more clear to me now that we've had Moshe on 1.5 times that he should become more of a regular guest, because he has quite a few different things he can talk about. Drush, Backstop, the history of Drupal, because he's been in the community for so long. But let's get on to today's primary topic, which is DrupalSpoons. And we will ask about the name, but before we do that, let's get the elevator pitch. What is DrupalSpoons?
Sure. So I've called DrupalSpoons is a model and a movement. So it's a model in the sense that we are trying to show the Drupal community and the Drupal Association that vanilla GitLab is a great platform for Drupal contrib project hosting. And we can use virtually all of its features successfully and happily. So DrupalSpoons uses the issue queue of GitLab.com. It uses merge requests and continuous integration from GitLab, and without any coding changes to the platform itself. So GitLab, has come a long way, and it's really an amazing platform. And I think in its current state, it's great for us to use for Drupal. I called DrupalSpoons a model and a movement. The movement part is relevant because a big change like this in Drupal's development community requires buy-in from a majority of people, and people who are willing to be vocal about their support. The status quo has a huge inertia to it, and so I've been asking people to support DrupalSpoons by joining it, by moving their projects to it, and by tweeting and Facebooking and all of that about it. Because I think that's the only way we get movement on this problem.
So we understand what, DrupalSpoons is. Where does the name come from, DrupalSpoons?
Sure. So DrupalSpoons is paired with another term called Drupal forks. All right, and Drupal forks is more obvious. So in Git, there's a common term, fork. That is like a child repository of the master repository. So Drupal forks is, well, I should start at the beginning. So the model of DrupalSpoons, the collaboration model, and you can read about this in the README on DrupalSpoons, is that there's a GitLab group called DrupalSpoons where all of the golden repositories are. So the Devel project is in there, Migrate CSV is in there, OwnTracks is in there, lots of contrib modules are in there already. Each of those has a pair project in the Drupal forks group. So there's actually 2 projects for Devel, for example. The only difference between the 2 is that the maintainers of Devel have commit rights in the DrupalSpoons group, and everyone has commit rights in the Drupal forks group. So the key thing is that everyone can contribute to whatever branches they want to and whatever changes they want to in Drupal forks. So Drupal forks is where all of the Git collaboration happens, and DrupalSpoons is where merge requests get accepted and then the Git is left alone.
And I'm going to make the same bad joke I made the last time, where, you know, the possibilities are endless. I mean, you could have Drupal knives, Drupal dessert spoons, Drupal, crustacean forks. I don't know, sporks. I mean, it literally just it's the best brand ever.
I appreciate that. I believe in naming. This project had no name in its beginning, and like everything I tried to write about it was like doing self gymnastics. And until I came up with a name and a naming scheme, it was hard to talk about. So yes, I'm happy that we got there, and I have some of those extensions in mind.
I think that it's probably worth pointing this out here too. One of the things, so I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but one of the podcasts that I do listen to is called Drive to Work. I've mentioned a couple of times, and it's by the head designer for Magic the Gathering. It's fascinating. He literally does a podcast on his drive to work. Now I bring that up because a lot of the things that he talks about in designing a game, I think, are applicable outside the game Magic the Gathering. And one of the things that he said that I think is incredibly poignant is what you just mentioned right now, Moshe. Naming something has power. So if you want to have a discussion about something, you need to give it a name. And so if there's, and I think this applies to many things. So if you have an issue on a project that you're trying to define, giving it a name gives people a common language that they can use to discuss it and work through. And so by naming DrupalSpoons, the name itself almost doesn't matter, although I think it's a great name. But the fact that now people have something to kind of coalesce around and discuss this issue of how do people contribute to projects, how do those contributions get pushed up into a master repository, I think that that's an incredibly important part of progress. I mean, naming is difficult, but it's incredibly important. Speaking of which, I think it's fair to say that you've had your hand in a few different Drupal movements, whether you started them or took part in them. What have you learned about gaining and maintaining momentum in projects and movements, and how will you apply those lessons here?
Yeah, it's a great question. Certainly, you need a good idea and an idea that is both good and at the right time. And then you need early adopters to jump on board and to promote it. I think if you can get that far, you're gonna have a movement. So one example would be the D7 pledge I think I had a better name for it back in the day, but it was my module pledges to be ready for Drupal 7 on the day of its release. I think it was Drupal 7. Was it Drupal 8? I think it was.
Well, I know there was one for Drupal 8. I was around just at the tail end of Drupal 6 becoming Drupal 7, so I don't recall.
Maybe it was Drupal 8. I don't know. Anyway, I did the same thing. I declared, on the project page, I wrote, Devel will be ready for Drupal 8 on its release day. And then I remember Quick Sketch jumped on board immediately and put the pledge on his modules and posted about it. And honestly, people saw a couple trusted persons in the community doing it, and they were like, yeah, that sounds great. And then, Drupal was substantially Drupal 8 was ready to be used on its release day. One of the things that plagued new releases of Drupal was, well, you couldn't actually move your sites to it on release day. And that problem was, substantially mitigated. So that's one movement that I'm thinking of. Other things that I started in Drupal that were kind of movements, the groups.drupal.org website I started, if you have to go way back, that's 2006 or 7 or something like that. But I put up, you'll notice that node number 2 on that website is the Boston Drupal meetup. I wanted the Boston Drupal group to get together and made a website to do that. And people started using it, and it really blossomed. There were dozens of events every night in real cities, in meet space. People were getting together and talking about Drupal, and that sort of thing had not happened prior to that. So I really think that movement was successful in promoting Drupal.
So Moshe, we've had Tim Lennon on this show a few times talking about the efforts that the Drupal Association started a few years ago and is still working on to move Drupal.org over to GitLab. And DrupalSpoons is on GitLab. So what is it that is different and maybe better about DrupalSpoons that makes this movement necessary? What kind of problems are you trying to solve?
All right, good question. So I'm really happy that the DA picked GitLab as their platform for developer tools. I think that was, the right product, the right, open source license fit for our community. So that's been great. So implementation wise, it's been really, really slow. The take up and adoption of GitLab within our developer tools. Right now, we still use it for its phase 1 usage, which is our Git projects are hosted there. But otherwise, we still use the patch workflow in the issue queue on Drupal.org. We don't use merge requests, and we don't use CI from GitLab. So DrupalSpoons suggests that our community would thrive if we used GitLab CI and we retired Drupal CI, and we would thrive if we used both issues and merge requests from GitLab. So that's kind of the proposal, and it's more than just a written proposal. It's a actualized proposal. So that's what's different. The DA is planning to use merge requests, and that's something they've called issue workspaces. If people want to Google that term, they'll find a proposal. That is a pretty cool proposal in that it spins up a repo for every issue where people can collaborate. However, the spoons and forks model doesn't require that many repos. It's not a new repo for every issue. It's the fork repo can have all of the branches in it, and everyone can commit to anything in there. So I think it's simpler in some ways. Certainly, there's less project proliferation.
So there's also less overhead for you, right? You have the ability to basically move faster than the DA can to kind of get, say, a proof of concept for this, which is out. People are using it, obviously, up. So, I think the point that is important here is you're able to move a lot faster than maybe the DA is at getting something out for people to actually use. And you have the ability to allow people to kind of kick the tires on this. Is that fair to say?
Definitely. Yeah. I've been able to be really fast. It's only been a few weeks that I've been working on DrupalSpoons, and it's already like a really thoroughly enjoyable product for projects to use.
And with that, how many projects have migrated to DrupalSpoons?
Once again, I have not actually looked up that number. But if people look in the Webmasters project, they'll see the list of closed issues where people are both joining and moving their projects. Let's say there's like 15 projects that are moved and something like 80 users that have joined, which are numbers that I'm pretty happy with. I want to circle back to Stephen's question because there's some stuff that I didn't mention. So I think the DA went about this issue workspaces model because they considered the issue queue of Drupal to be a non-negotiable, non-changeable thing. That's the way we want to work. And so they made a way to kind of like shoehorn Git into the issue queue. And I think it's important to say, what are the pain points with the current issue queue? And so I have a little list here of the pain that I've felt with the issue queue. There's the culture and practice of nitpicking, which is to say you propose a change, you upload a patch, and there are really minor problems with it. Coding standards, disagreements about variable names, and that sort of thing. So the culture on the Drupal issue queue is to just write your comment. Sometimes you use Dredditor and you say exactly which lines you object to, but otherwise you don't typically help fix the problem at all. You just leave the comment. And at least for me, over time, I got worn down by that practice because I would have to roll and re-roll patches that had trivial problems with them. And when I say trivial problems, I'm not saying that the code should have gone in without those fixes. I think the comments are legitimate, but I think the commenter could probably just fix the problem instead of talking about the trivial change. And so GitLab and GitHub, for that matter, have fixed this problem. They fixed it by when you're writing your code comments, you can actually suggest the change that you want to make. So you just go ahead and change the variable name or the singular to plural or fix the typo. And it records that as like a Git change that the author can accept. And for me, that subtle change is hugely important. You don't have to get out your command line tools. Neither party has to get out their command line tools to fix this. The suggestion is done with a web browser and the acceptance is done with a web browser. So your velocity is much better. It even goes a step. And
just to make sure we're clear here, when you say someone makes an edit and it needs to be accepted by the author, it's the author of the merge request.
Yes.
Right. Not the not the author of the project getting back involved again.
No, the author of the merge request.
Yep.
There's a tool within GitLab called the Web Ide that takes this even further. This is an awesome tool. I want to make a screencast about it soon. So you can take an existing merge request that someone has, let's say it edits 3 or 4 different files, and you click on Open Web Ide button in the merge request, and it opens that thing up. And in there, you can make edits to all of the files that are changed. You can preview the changes. You can make interim commits right from your web browser. Once you commit, you can see the pipeline running, and you can see if your things actually passed or not. So it's a genuine IDE, syntax highlighting, that sort of thing. I don't think it does the code completion part of IDE, but like that's why they call it Web IDE. But it's pretty solid, and it's always getting more solid. So that's what like developers will use to review merge requests. Just make them better. You don't have to talk about them so much. So, that's a pain point with the issue queue that is completely solved by moving to vanilla GitLab. I have some more, but maybe someone wanted to say something about the Web IDE.
Well, I just think, not so much about the Web IDE, but like in general, this is the way most development teams are used to working now, right? You do some code, you put in a pull request or a merge request, and then, depending on your company, you have a review process, and then somebody says, yeah, it's good to go, and it gets merged in, right? So the idea of having to like throw a patch on a Drupal.org issue at this stage of the game is a little daunting. And as you've just illustrated through what you said, very time consuming for both the person developing the patch and the maintainer of the module.
Yeah, for sure. So we spend a lot of time in the issue queue re-rolling patches. And sometimes we have this thing where there's a disruptive patch coming along that's changing lots of files and changing lots of APIs. I think it's probably a little bit less common now that we keep backward compatibility. But those are like, hey, this patch is going to be committed on June 8th. So beware. And then lots of people have to re-roll stuff after that. With Git branches, a lot of those re-rolls would never even happen because Git knows at what point you branched, and it can figure out how to merge in the merge request, even if it's old and code is changed in the meanwhile. GitLab has this button called rebase, which is super useful. If your merge request has gotten stale, but it knows how to rebase it and make it current, you can just click that button and it will do it for you. And then because the code has changed, the pipelines run again. So in fact, you have current tests that verify that the rebase has worked. And all this happens with a web browser by anyone on the team. So like, your velocity and your annoyance is very much improved here.
Fair to say in that instance, though, like for the diehard people that love their command line, they could also do the same things via the command line, right?
You can. And people have written bash scripts that are like download the patch and rebase it and upload it again. And, good for them for, working around the limitations of Drupal.org. But we, in the 2020s, we don't need to do that. We can just have a platform that has a rebase button.
This also lowers the barrier for people to contribute, doesn't it?
It very much does.
Yeah, because anybody can hit the rebase button, even if you don't know what rebasing is. So that's just a task that the commit author doesn't have to take. That's going to have to be taken anyway at some point, right?
Yeah. Along the lines of including more people. Right now, we have this problem where you have to use Git tools or at least a Git GUI or something in order to contribute. And that goes for even documentation changes. And so with GitLab, you can click on a file. They have an edit button on every file. And you just make the changes you want. They can be really trivial README changes. You write a commit message, press the commit button. It says, do you want to open up a merge request? You say yes. And you give it a title and a body, and like you have proposed a change without using any tools on your desktop. So it really is a more inclusive way to work. I think once we have that really inclusive and convenient way to contribute, I think that even things like the handbook that are currently maintained as Drupal.org pages, you might find them moving to Git once we have a GitLab tool. For one thing, they can be versioned much easier. Drupal versions things quite well, but I'm more thinking of a Drupal 8 handbook page about Path Auto module versus the Drupal 7 Path Auto module. That lends itself to Git a little bit more than it lends itself to Drupal.
It's interesting because as you were saying that, I was thinking of those instances where you find like the smallest change in a module, like, oh, this README says that you should do this, and really you should do that. And as you're using it in your head, you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to put a patch in for this. I will do that later, right? I'm gonna devote personal time or time later on to make that update to this module. And sometimes those things just kind of like get blown out. You don't end up doing them. With this process, it's super easy to just go in to the UI and say, okay, here's the change. Here's a merge request or pull request for it. And it's like, done. Okay, it took me 5 minutes to make this update. So it's very interesting that like that definitely seems to be more accessible to me than the current model.
So before you get back to your list of pain points,
we're still on number
I'm curious
one.
I'm curious if you think this will help with stale issues, because one of the things that I've noticed over the years, and we've talked about on the show a couple of times, is there'll be an issue that started in Drupal 6 and then got moved to Drupal 7 and then Drupal 8, now Drupal 9, now Drupal 9.1, has 400 comments and patches that are passing testing, applying, and like you said, there's just a little bit of nitpicking or additional features being asked. I imagine this new workflow will speed those things up enough that these type of issues just get resolved at such a high rate that you don't I got notifications on my dashboard the other day for somebody commenting on an issue that was opened in 2013 and it hasn't been commented on in 5 years. I mean, I'm curious if you think this new workflow will kind of take care of those kinds of things. Or if that's a separate issue.
Yeah, take care of is a bit strong. That'll still always happen a bit, but I think that the percentage of issues that go stale for no reason would go down, because the kinds of things they get tripped up on wouldn't happen anymore. So yeah, I do think it'll help with that problem.
That's exciting. That's very exciting.
Totally. It's something I could get excited about for sure.
All right, let's continue with your pain points.
Oh, I appreciate that. I hope I'm not, taking over the meeting here.
It is your meeting.
We talked about nitpicks. We talked about rerolls. Issue queue pain points. Issue queue does not have bulk editing, which is shocking because Drupal does offer bulk editing. But when people have to move 50 issues over from Drupal 8.7 to Drupal 8.8, or hundreds of issues in the case of Drupal core, the way that's done is that typically XJM opens up a request in the infrastructure queue for Neil to run his script that goes in and node saves all of these issues.
I had no idea.
To the new status, to the new version.
I had no idea.
So, and I think there are lots of similar examples just within a project where you'd like to bulk change things, but you can't. And so GitLab has that. It has bulk changes for issues. As long as you can query and get a list of issues, you can change lots of things about them. So that's a huge help for us and helps keep our metadata up to date. And similarly, Drupal.org has a pretty awesome REST API for getting issue queue information out, but it's read-only. You cannot write to issues in a bulk way, except by getting a cookie and posting and getting form tokens and that kind of stuff. So the lack of that write API hurts us. It hurts us a lot in subtle ways. For example, DrupalSpoons would like to close and post, "Hey, your issue has been migrated to this new URL." But we haven't done that because Drupal.org has no way to programmatically interact with its content. GitLab has an amazing read and write API. Milestones and issues and MRs and all the things you can get out and you can read by API. And that's actually used by the product, so they really work and they're well documented. I think that's really, really nice. Other things like chat applications, chat ops. When you're able to have an API for everything, then you can have alternative interfaces. And you can say, "Hey, close this issue," via Slack message, and it's done. GitLab has Slack integration. It has that sort of stuff. We can use that once we have a writable API. So another pain point, if you haven't gotten bored of all of our pains, it's easy to paste an image into a text area in GitLab and have that show up in your comment. This sort of thing is painful on Drupal.org. You have to upload the image and then refer to it, right? I think that's the workflow. If we had more images, we would have, higher quality of collaboration. Lots of pains are solved here, and that's the end of my list, fortunately. So we can go on to the next question. But I wanted to be thorough about those things because there are some changes that people aren't going to love about using GitLab. I think they're relatively minor, but they're still there, and maybe they're not minor to everyone. But you have to remember why we wanted GitLab in the first place. The reason why we want it is because there's a long list of significant pain points, and I'm trying to really illustrate those.
So I'm let's pretend that I'm a module maintainer. I'm interested in Drupalspoons. Can you walk us through what does that mean to migrate a project over?
Yeah. So there's a docs page on Drupalspoons, but all you really have to do is first join Drupalspoons yourself as a user, which means you get an account on GitLab if you haven't gotten one already, gitlab.com. And then you go to the webmaster's issue queue and you open up an issue with just the words Drupalspoons, join Drupalspoons as the title. Then a bot is going to pick up that new issue and it's going to read your username out. It's going to add you to 2 different groups, Drupalspoons and Drupal forks, with the right permissions in each. And then it's going to post a comment saying, "Welcome to Drupalspoons, and here's what you might want to do next." And it's going to close the issue. So there's the writable API in action. Well, not just the writable API, it's continuous integration when webhooks are recognizing a new issue. That's a webhook. And a CI pipeline is running. It's adding you to the 2 groups. It's posting a comment. It's closing the issue. That's the API part. So that's personally how you join Drupalspoons. The next part of your question was, how does a project join? Same thing. You open up a new issue in Webmasters. It says migrate project name to Drupalspoons. That's the title. When that sort of title is posted into that, we have a webhook that fires. It's going to create your project in the Drupalspoons group. It's going to create your project in the Drupal forks group. It's going to give you permissions in those repos and configure them appropriately. And it's going to post a comment and it's going to close the issue. The one piece I haven't mentioned yet is after it creates those projects, it's going to migrate all of your issues from Drupal.org to the Drupalspoons project. It preserves all the metadata on your issue about what its current status is and what version it was filed against and what component and so forth. All that gets moved over. And so the comment that gets posted after that's done tells you a little bit about changes you need to make to your Drupal.org repo so that people are not confused and still using the wrong repo We want to close Git writes to the old repo. We want to close issues so people aren't collaborating in the wrong place.
So what does it look like for a site builder that's going to look and download a module? Are they doing anything different, or are they still interacting with Drupal.org?
Nothing changes for users of Drupal. So the model we have right now is that periodically the code that's hosted on GitLab is pushed to the original repos that we've always been using on Drupal.org. So everything works on Drupal.org as it has, namely releases happen on Drupal.org, packaging for Composer, the tarball packaging, but more importantly, the Composer facade just works because all the code is being pushed to Drupal.org. Speaking
of Composer, we've mentioned a lot of the pain points that kind of go around the patch process and issue queue. One thing, though, that Patches does for Drupal developers is it makes it incredibly easy to apply a patch in your Composer file. Has that changed with the DrupalSpoons project? So if I have a patch that one of my modules needs that hasn't been merged for whatever reason yet, how do I apply that change to my project?
Yeah, good question. So no, that workflow doesn't change. I think the model that Drupal's kind of ended up on is really good, with composer.json having a manifest of patches that are applied. The patch URLs are available on GitLab. You can take virtually any two Git references and compare them on GitLab. And when you do, you can append .patch to the URL, and you get a raw patch file instead of a web page with header and footer and all of that kind of stuff. So the URLs will be GitLab URLs instead of Drupal.org URLs, but the patch applying tool doesn't care. Everything's the same as far as that goes.
And it'll probably be easier to fix patches when you need to too, because one of the issues with fixing a patch is it's hard sometimes to see what specific version of the module it was started with. And so knowing how, where you need to start with the reroll sometimes can be difficult. But if it's all in GitLab in a merge request, then you can just very easily see what's changed and what needs to be updated.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that workflow will be, as good or easier once we're on vanilla GitLab. I had one thing that I didn't mention that I wanted to mention, and that's kind of what is the eventual goal of DrupalSpoons. So this is a little bit of a tricky concept, but the goal is for us to use vanilla GitLab and be operated by the Drupal Association on git.drupalcode.org. So DrupalSpoons is intended to be like a short duration experiment, maybe a year, let's say, where we both prove out the model and the movement. Projects move and start enjoying benefits today. But once the DA is ready for us to use vanilla GitLab on their servers, we're going to move everything over there. And GitLab has an import-export tool that makes moving stuff easy. So I don't anticipate that day being very complicated.
What is that? I mean, so dig into that a little bit, because what does that look like? So, DrupalSpoons has all of these great features and all of these things that clearly, by your pain points, like are necessary, right? Do you anticipate that the we'll say version, for lack of a better word, that the DA is working on is going to exactly mirror what's happening with DrupalSpoons, or do you imagine them kind of picking and choosing kind of the structure and the feature set that you have set up, pushing out their own thing?
I would expect that there are going to be some changes and customizations. Me on GitLab.com, I can't customize the header and footer and add a link into some place and so forth, but the Drupal Association can. So I think they can and should make the product better for our community. I guess the part that I'm trying to emphasize is, hey, maybe we don't need to do issue workspaces. Maybe we shouldn't have a sacrosanct opinion of our issue queue. Let's just use GitLab issues and make them as good as we can. And let's use MRs as they are. And Drupal CI is a separate part of the conversation, but to me, that's the one where DrupalSpoons is like inarguably much better than Drupal CI. Drupal CI it was an absolutely pioneering project when it came out. The simple test framework was added in Drupal 5, I believe. And fun fact, for better or worse, I am the originator of the simple test module way back in the day. So anything people don't like about it, I will take the blame for that one. It gets its name from a competitor to PHP Unit called Simple Test, which I thought was like a slightly better project, and that's why I modeled it after Simple Test. But clearly the PHP community rallied behind PHP Unit, but that's where that name comes from. Anyway, so Drupal CI, like the Boomba Towers, really built that, with their own two hands before the DevOps revolution, and it's sort of been a little bit ahead of the DevOps revolution for a long time. So today, if you were starting a CI platform, you wouldn't build it the way that thing has been built. And I think that GitLab CI is a opportunity to just finally walk away from a legacy code base and come up with something that has no custom code. The way DrupalSpoons CI works is that there is a CI template that projects inherit from, and that's how Drupal CI works. But you can override any part of the template you want to as the project maintainer. You can do things that are impossible on Drupal CI right now. You can, if you were the maintainer of the Redis module or the Memcache module or the Node integration module or the Solar module, you can spin up additional services and start testing with them. Lots of other customizations you want to do. One thing that Drupal CI is really good at is permutation testing along three axes: your database backend, your PHP version, and your Drupal core version. DrupalSpoons has that same functionality, but there's no custom code. We just use the sort of permutation capability that Pipelines gives you.
All right, I'm sold. Moshe for president. Like I'm all in. Let's do it. So let's pivot a little bit. We have a couple of listener questions. I think we answered most of them, but looks like there are two that we haven't touched on. So obviously, Drupal.org, you create an issue, you provide a patch, that patch gets rolled in, the issue gets closed, you get credit for it, right? How does DrupalSpoons kind of attack that problem or answer that call?
DrupalSpoons has an implementation of credits that I think is like 90% of what is important and good about the Drupal.org solution. It's really edge cases that are perhaps not as good. So when you're working on an issue or a merge request in DrupalSpoons, you can assign credit to user accounts as you go along. So if 3 different users have participated in it, you as the maintainer can keep the list in the assigned column of who's going to get credit. Okay. And the user accounts that are mentioned there could be accounts that belong to people, or accounts that belong to organizations, either one. They're all just GitLab accounts in the end. When an issue is closed or when a merge request is closed, that's considered the list of people who are getting credit for that issue. As a demonstration of DrupalSpoons and credits, I wrote a pipeline that does an API request and gets all of the closed issues and merge requests on DrupalSpoons. If there are assignees who are getting credit, it gathers all of them and posts that information to Drupal Sheets, or Google Sheets rather. So there is a Google Sheet that we can put in the notes for the podcast that is like the credits report, and that's updated every day.
Interesting. The next, so both of these questions are actually from Norman. I want to give Norman credit because I did not come up with these. Norman is a real listener. So we're giving Norman credit. Well, his last question here is: any initial feedback from the Drupal Association? Obviously, you're talking to them, and there's a kind of a roadmap that you have for this project. But interesting to see if they had any feedback on what you have so far.
Sure. I think lots of people are curious about that. So I've been in contact with the Drupal Association. First of all, I was a founding member of the Drupal Association. So I have some good ties there. I'm no longer serving in that capacity, but I still have good relationships. So I sent an email to a lot of members of that group before announcing DrupalSpoons and got some good feedback then. And also after announcing, got some good feedback by email and by Twitter. So the DA is watching DrupalSpoons really closely. It's my impression from what I've heard from them that they are rooting for DrupalSpoons. They would love for the community to embrace it and adopt it. I think should that happen, that makes their job much, much easier. The Drupal Association has not much money, as we've all seen through the cancellation of the DrupalCon, and they have lots of things to do, lots of responsibilities. And maintaining Drupal CI and project modules is a huge cost, and it's a huge cost for them. And the outline I've made gets rid of those costs. And those people who are working on that stuff are freed up to work on the next highest priority, which is a great thing. So I think the DA is definitely hoping that this works out. You might ask, well, if the DA wants it and this podcast is excited about it, like, why aren't we just doing it? And I think the answer to that is the status quo is very powerful, and people get really hung up on minor changes and perceived regressions in the thing you're moving to. And I just hope that we can accept and tolerate that those regressions are real, but they're not, breaking problems.
They're not really non-negotiable, right?
Yes.
Isn't it, so I mean, it's that, but isn't it also like it's a lot harder and bigger of a problem to like move a whole community like Drupal from what they have now to something like DrupalSpoons, right? You're in, and this is kind of why earlier we had talked about you being able to move fast and get a proof of concept up, but like you have the I'm going to call it a luxury. Don't take offense to that, but you have the luxury of having it be if you want to do this, come on over and you can model, as opposed to the Drupal Association that's like, hey, we're switching to this and we don't want to maintain two things. So it's like you have to take it or whether you want
take
it
or
or
leave
not
it.
model. Exactly.
Yeah.
For sure, it's a bigger project for them to do it than for me to do it. But I don't think the size of the project is the reason why we haven't done it for the last 5 years. The Drupal Association, the Drupal community can accomplish large projects. I think the power of the status quo and the power of the issue queue is the larger impediment. If you are Drum and Mixologic and Tim, a big project is daunting, and they might say that like that's a big deal to move everyone to MRs and issues and CI. And they're not wrong, but I think that if they had the whole community cheering them on, we have the money and the ability to make that happen.
So if you only take one thing from this podcast today, it's reach out to your association member and tell them that you are cheering them on.
As we come to the close and wrap up, is there anything else that we missed on DrupalSpoons? Anything that you'd like our listeners to know?
I would love for the listeners to join DrupalSpoons. Okay, so we'll put that link in the show notes. If you are a module maintainer, I'd encourage you to go ahead and migrate it over. If you have concerns and questions, contact me, post an issue in the webmasters queue if you want to have a public conversation. Either one is fine. And, tweet about it and show your support, because I think we're at a critical point where vocal support is important.
Hey, if you have questions or feedback, reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can also email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can also get show updates by signing up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And we'd like to say thank you to our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button.
And again, thank you for joining us this week, Moshe, and being gracious enough to re-record. If our listeners wanted to reach out to you, they had some feedback or questions, how could they get a hold of you?
My contact form works on Drupal.org, or you can hit me up on Twitter. My handle is Weitzman, Weitzman. While I have the floor here, I want to congratulate the three of you on a milestone. 250 episodes is not an easy thing to do. That's really like, durability over a long period of time, doing the same thing over and over and informing the community and entertaining the community. So I just want to thank you guys for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Moshe.
And John, where can our listeners reach you?
You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, also on Drupal.org. And then you can find out about Oomph at oomphinc.com.
And you, Stephen?
It's Stephen Cross on Twitter with a PH. And you, Nick?
And listeners can reach me, as always, at NixVan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.